Welcome, folks that are here. I see a few more still filtering in. My name is Julia Potter, and I'm happy to be helping host this webinar today. I'm going to turn it over to Marisol and Jean very shortly, but I just want to give you some information on how you might be able to ask questions. We are in webinar mode, so by default you are all muted. But you can ask questions using the Q&A function. If you're on a laptop, it'll be at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a cell phone or an iPad, same kind of thing. If you kind of tap at the slide that you're viewing, you'll get a little bar that pops up, and there's a little question mark inside of a chat bubble. You can enter questions through that Q&A. We'd love for you to say hello in the chat and just let us know where you're joining from. And we'll have about a 5-minute presentation about the Women in Mind Stability Group from Marisol Valerio before we get started with our main program, which is a presentation from Jean Hutchinson. We are going to save all questions for the end. So if you've entered a question in the Q&A and Jean or Marisol aren't answering it, don't worry, we will get to it. I think we should have plenty of time for that today. But if we don't, we'll do our best to follow up with you afterwards. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Marisol to kick us off with our first presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Julia. And hello, everyone. First of all, I hope you all had a fabulous International Women's Day celebration. I thought it was really motivating to see so many inspiring messages and posts over the weekend. Now, as you know, this year's theme calls for action to unlock equal opportunities and create a future where no one is left behind. So aligned with this theme, our webinar today is part of several initiatives that the Women in Mind Stability Group will be organizing throughout the year to continue advancing these important goals. So welcome to the first ever webinar hosted by the Women in Mind Stability Group. My name is Marisol Valerio. I'm a rock mechanics engineer at WSP, and I'm the chair of the Women in Mind Stability Committee. And we're very excited to be presenting this webinar today, which will provide practical guidance and tips for preparing abstracts and papers for conferences. Now, before we dive into the main content, as Julia said, I'll be giving a brief introduction about our group, including our background, our mission, and our objectives. Women in Mind Stability is a global community of women and our allies who work or study in technical disciplines within mind slope stability. Our members are from all parts of the world, from all career stages, and from a combination of industry, consulting, and academic fields. Our group promotes collaboration to increase visible representation of women in the technical community globally. And one of our main objectives is to provide diverse leadership to those who currently may not see many career role models to aspire to or seek guidance from. Our group welcomes everyone who supports these goals. So if you're interested in joining us, please follow our LinkedIn page at the link shown on the slide here. And we'll also be posting this link on the webinar chat. Our group mission is to encourage, support, and promote the advancement and visibility of women as technical leaders in mind stability. And we do this by connecting, advocating for, and empowering women at all career stages. We have several exciting initiatives planned for 2025 to continue delivering on our mission, including networking and mentoring events, online presentations and awards, workshops and webinars like the one we're presenting today to promote knowledge and skill enhancement. And this year, we're also working on establishing a fund to sponsor women to attend conferences and other technical events. So stay tuned for more information to come about these exciting events throughout the year. Now, our group was established in 2023, so we've only been around for a couple of years. But during that short time, thanks to the level of enthusiasm and support that we've received across the industry globally, we've started to see some very encouraging changes, particularly relating to conferences. At the Slow Stability Conference in 2023, there was an unprecedented participation of women in the technical program. And that trend was also reflected at Slope Stability 2024 last year, where there was a significant increase in the visible representation of women in the technical program compared to 2022. So we want to continue building on this momentum, and we hope that the tips and tools that we'll be providing in our webinar today will encourage even more women to participate in conferences and present their technical work. Now, before I introduce our speaker, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the Women in Mind Stability Committee leads for their dedication and commitment to this initiative, and for all the effort they've put into establishing and leading our group. Several of our committee members will be participating in the Q&A portion of our webinar today, so you'll get to hear from them and learn from their extensive experience preparing technical abstracts and papers. And lastly, I'd like to give a huge thank you to the Geotechnical Center of Excellence at the University of Arizona for allowing us to use their online platform to host this webinar today. Now with that, it's now my great honor to introduce our speaker, Dr. Jean Hutchinson. Jean is a Professor Emerita in Geological Sciences and Engineering at Queen's University in Canada, specializing in rock engineering, site characterization, and risk management for mining and transportation infrastructure. Jean currently serves as an expert review board consultant through Innovative Geomechanics, Inc. In recognition of her contributions to engineering research and practice, Jean was elected as a fellow of both the Canadian Academy of Engineering and the Engineering Institute of Canada, and she has received numerous prestigious awards, including the 2024 Trailblazer Award from Women in Mining Canada. Please join me in welcoming the amazing Dr. Jean Hutchinson.
Thank you so much, Marisol. That was a really kind and lovely introduction. I appreciate it a great deal. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. We all feel very strongly that the more representation we can have in the industry and in conferences, the better we will all be. So thank you very much for being here. And we hope that the next part of an hour will be very useful for you. So as Marisol said, getting published, tips for preparing conference abstracts and papers. Could you please advance? Thank you. So the agenda for the webinar is, the objective is to provide you some tips and tricks for writing these types of contributions. And if you haven't done it before, it's sometimes quite daunting to even start to work out how to approach this. And so that's what we're hoping to give you some ideas about today. And certainly we've structured this so that you'll have a lot of time, hopefully, for question and answer at the end to really help you with any challenges you're facing in this regard. But as Marisol said at the beginning, it really is to try and encourage more women to actively participate in conferences. It's a very rewarding thing to do when you get through the sort of early stages of this process. So part one is this presentation, which will be recorded, and this will be posted on the Women in Mind Stability webpage. Part two, as I said, is an open discussion, which will be recorded, but only as reference for the notes that we will prepare to summarize the chat and Q&A components. Next, please. And we'll be preparing those notes and putting them on the webpage after the session. Next, please. Thank you. So in terms of conference submissions, there are sort of two main ways that you might approach a conference depending on how they've structured it. Usually you're submitting an abstract, and in the more common form, it would be an abstract that's less than 1 page, usually 200 or 300 words. That is submitted for review and acceptance, and once it's accepted, then it's followed up by a paper that you'll write, generally 8 or 12 pages, depending on the conference. And very often that paper will also be reviewed and edits will be requested. In some circumstances, there's also an extended abstract opportunity, which is a 1 or 2 page document that is reviewed. And if it's accepted, edits may be requested, but that's the extent of the writing that you'll do. So depending on the type of conference, you'll see either abstract or extended abstract. And generally that presentation of the material is either in a podium session, 12 to 15 plus minutes, depending on, again, the structure of the conference, with time for questions afterwards usually. Some conferences have gone to a different style, and you'll have seen on some of these slides a picture of Megan doing a short pitch presentation at the conference in Brazil earlier this or last year. And that's usually either a sort of poster format or 2 or 3 slides maximum with maybe 5 minutes standing in front of a screen. And that provides an opportunity for more extensive questions and informal discussion as well. And sometimes you'll be asked whether you wish to suggest that your abstract and paper will go to the podium or to one of these pitch sessions. And so you can make your decision based on your interest and comfort level. And then finally, sometimes conferences will have a poster session, and that's generally a situation where you'll have a free flow of people walking by your poster. They may want you to present the poster in a sort of formal manner, or they may just want to ask you some questions after they've read the poster. And then some conferences pair the posters with a specific block of time within the agenda. They may hold a reception at the same time as the poster session. They may have a poster convener who helps sort of with that flow of people by your poster. And the way you can choose between these things really depends on you and what the intended audience that you've identified for what you want to talk about, and also, of course, your level of comfort with public speaking and also your networking objectives. So each of these offers different opportunities for those things. Next, please. We wanted to give you an idea of what happens when your abstract is submitted. So each conference will have formed a technical committee, and that's generally chaired by 1 or 2 people who are on the organizing committee and will likely be meeting every month in the lead up to the conference to make sure everything runs smoothly. But then they'll be supported by a group of volunteers who usually represent a range of different technical interests, and therefore abstracts can be focused in different directions according to the interest and knowledge of those volunteers. Usually there's maybe 2 or more people reviewing your abstract. And when those people are reviewing your abstract, they could be thinking about any of the following questions or all of the following questions. So the first one is this abstract good enough to accept or not? And some conferences, especially if they're smaller and they have limited space, they might have quite stringent considerations for whether you accept or not. Others, which are big conferences with large capacity, are often less stringent. So it depends a bit on which conference it is. They're very often looking for alignment with the conference theme, either an overall theme or a set of themes that they've identified. And sometimes you'll be asked to say, I would like this abstract considered under theme 4, for example, whatever that is. They'll be considering whether the conference attendees will be interested in what you'll be presenting. Is it something new? Is it a case of you discussing lessons learned? Is it a case history of interest? Are you addressing new methods and applications? Or there may be some other components as well. They would like to have some idea of your findings, your recommendations, and your conclusions. Over my career, often what's missing from an abstract, because you're writing it usually a year or so before the conference, is that component of what will likely be some of the recommendations and conclusions from the paper. Clarity of text, logic of flow, those are key considerations for the people reviewing the abstracts. And then most conferences really want to avoid excessive self or company promotion. And so in the abstract, make sure that you reference your company once or twice, but not continuously through it, because they want to hear your talk sort of free from that component. And then a fully referenced conference is one where then your paper is also reviewed. And most conferences these days do have a committee which then go on to review your paper, which you'll submit after your abstract is accepted. Next, please. So another big question is, what could you write about? What would be of interest to other people? And oftentimes people are sort of underestimate the value of what they're doing or what might be of interest to other people at a conference. So one of the things we really wanted to stress today is, particularly in some of the conferences that we've been holding events at recently, in terms of those conferences, it's really valuable to share real experiences and data. I'll come to this later. That may have some challenges in terms of confidentiality of the information, but those real experiences and data oftentimes are things that you may think everybody else has access to or has realized. But when you step back and think about it, you had to come to that realization yourself. And so others may not have done that yet. And so those things are very valuable. They may seem simple and obvious to you, but really think about whether what you've just learned, it would be a good addition to the industry knowledge base. So some examples of things you could write about are key findings of a site investigation or monitoring program, analysis of stability, results, design using modeling. You could have back analysis of unusual behavior. You could have development or application of new methods and technologies. You could have lessons learned from a failure. Often these are harder to publish because of those issues of confidentiality, but those findings are very valuable. So in the inset box, really think about whether any of the information you're including is sensitive or confidential. And if it is, could you write about that topic or that site without including any identifiable content? So could you call it site XYZ, for example, and therefore be able to publish the information without really identifying the site if the content is sensitive or confidential? And then can you request permission to publish, and do you think you'll get that? So, oh, sorry, go ahead. Thank you. So when you're thinking about the abstract, the first thing I think people start to do is sit down and try and write. And I think the very first thing you need to do before you do that is say, what story do I actually want to tell? I have 8 or 12 pages eventually. I have maybe 10, 15 minutes to talk about it or a poster. What story am I telling in this paper? Because very often you have a whole bunch of ideas and you may want to try and get them all into a paper, but they may not fit logically into one of these conference papers. So the next thing I generally do is actually think about how many images and or tables I would need to tell that story. Because if I have 8 pages, for example, and I have images that will take up 4 or 5 of those pages, I really don't have a lot of room left for text, and therefore I need to rethink about the story I'm wanting to tell. So that's the next point. Can you tell that story within the eventual paper page limit and the type of presentation? So don't try and tell a really complex story in a single 8-page paper. If you have a complex story, think about a part 1, part 2, or this conference, that conference, in terms of telling that information. But in the abstract, you generally want to include a brief introduction to your topic, your project, your site. You want to mention the key components of the paper. If it's a case history, what are you talking about in that paper? As I said before, you certainly want to include some idea of the conclusions, recommendations, outcomes. And then depending on the type of abstract, if it's one of those extended abstracts, you may actually include a figure or a table and a list of references. Another big consideration, especially when you're starting out, is who should be listed as co-authors. If you're putting in the abstract and planning on presenting it, that's fairly clear. But then which other names will you list in your list of co-authors? So were there people who contributed materially to the project? Did they help you write the paper? Usually those who contribute the most to the paper itself are listed in that order, or it could be in alphabetical order, or it could be by company. And sometimes, the number of people who've contributed may be so large that you're going to put some of those names into acknowledgements as opposed to in the list of co-authors. So it's a bit of a personal and probably company perspective on which names should be included, but think about that fairly carefully. Next, please. So be aware that once you've submitted the abstract and been accepted, you can later change some of the content of that abstract and paper after acceptance. You can change the list of authors if you need to, if you forgot somebody or someone doesn't feel they've done enough on the work to have their name included. And that's especially the case when there is sometimes, more than a year lead in to when the time of the conference will be. And so sometimes when the work being reported is not completed, then you really do need to change the abstract and the paper. but a significant change in topic or theme is not acceptable because they've taken your paper under the title and theme that you submitted it under. So some changes afterwards and certainly in the paper, but not in the overall theme. Next, please. And certainly if you are particularly in a situation where you'll need to get permission for publishing some of the information, you need to leave sufficient time for both the abstract and then the paper to be reviewed by your co-authors, by your company, by your client, whomever needs to review it, you need to leave time for that. So you need to plan your schedule accordingly. Then if you're doing internal review, generally you would thank them in your paper acknowledgements as opposed to in a co-authorship list, and including them in the acknowledgements only as long as you're not then identifying a company which wishes to remain anonymous in that particular paper. Next, please. And again, you can withdraw your submission prior to the deadline. So let's say you just cannot get the paper finished or you cannot get permission to publish it in its form. You can withdraw that, but do note that if you've had to put down a financial deposit, you generally are not going to be able to get that back at that point. Next, please. So then once you've had the abstract accepted, usually when you start to write the paper, you're going to be working from a conference paper template, which would be provided to you by that particular conference. And that usually in terms of detail has a font size they want in the text, and in particular in the figures. So when you're making the figures, you want to be aware of that font size so you're not having to go back later and revise everything. It may have a set list of headings, may not, and it will likely have a page limit. And so again, when I'm starting to work on a paper for a conference within a certain page limit, as I said before, think about the figures and the tables I need to tell that story. Put those into the template. Insert them in throughout the template as you think they should flow. Don't make them too small because otherwise your font size gets too small and no one can see the figure. Any text you can convert into a table, please do so. That makes the paper a bit shorter. Add any references you'll cite into the end of the document. And then once you've done those things, you can write the text around those elements, keeping within that maximum page limit. Acknowledgements are sometimes forgotten, but they're extremely important. Who helped you do the work? Who funded the work? Maybe who reviewed the work? Next, please. And then consider that the paper may apparently be only available to the conference attendees. A number of conferences now make all the papers available afterward, particularly with sponsorship from a variety of companies or firms that support them. But if it seems that the papers are only going to go to the conference attendees, just assume that in the end, that paper will be available to anyone and everyone. Now, especially on the internet, people can find anything anywhere. So assume from the beginning that your paper will be an open source paper. And if you have a choice to make your paper open source, in my mind, that's the best way to go, because then it is available to anybody who wants to follow up on your interesting and important thoughts. But the open source does depend on who holds the copyright. So that's a consideration, but certainly just think that it'll be much more widely available than only to the conference attendees in terms of what you include. Next, please. So in writing the paper, this is a really great table that Carla gave me from a paper that was published in Portuguese. So she's done a great job of translating it. But what you see here is a sort of list of the different parts of a paper and the description of each of them. And these are really around probably maybe a research type of paper where you've got the title, the authors, the abstract we've already talked about. You generally have keywords in every paper, so those would be the words that people could search to find your paper afterwards. And you'll have an introduction, a theoretical basis for what you're presenting in the paper, some idea of the methods that have been used to produce the data or the outcome that you're describing. There'll be discussion of results and the outcomes of those results, some conclusions, sometimes future work, acknowledgements and references. So that's sort of a standard set of headings for a paper, particularly, as I said, if you're really undergoing or reporting on a scientific study or a study of some sort. And you can see, if you want to have a look on the bottom left, there are some conferences with international conferences which have open access papers. So have a look at those and you can get a sense of some of the things that have been published recently in those variety of conferences. And when you're looking for information as background, the two reference portals that you see there can give you some very good access to sources of information. So all of those places you should have a look about the topic you're wanting to talk about. Next, please. When we present at conferences about a particular site or a particular case history, we then need to include as well the site location and description, generally some information of the geology if that's relevant, where it's located, some of those considerations. Next, please. If you're doing a case history, the case history details may in fact replace the methods component, the theoretical basis and methods component of a paper. That may be the focus of your paper, and then you have to work out what are the subheadings within the case history that are important to tell your story. Next, please. But one of the key things I think to keep in mind is you have practical knowledge, you have scientific methods, you have specialized methods and workflows. You've likely had a number of eureka moments or moments where you've really sort of had a light bulb go on. These are all very valuable, especially in conference settings where people will hear that and have likewise, hopefully, eureka moments. So don't shy away from including information about your practical experience and some of those methods and workflows that you're developing. Next, please. And so I'd like to thank you very much for your attention today and for joining us on this webinar. And as noted at the beginning, we're joined by Megan, Carla, Julia, and Felicia, and they'll also be answering some of the questions that you pose with us. So again, thank you very much for your attention today, for your interest in the Women in Mine Stability. Thank you to Marisol for the terrific introduction at the beginning, and to Julia for hosting this and doing all that she does as well for Women in Mining. So thank you.